Welcome to Home and Away, a Tottenham Hotspur podcast hosted by myself, Graeme Spice and Glenn Cowie, where we discuss all things Tottenham Hotspur with both a match-attending and international supporters view. This episode, I'm without Glenn, but I am joined by returning guest Ben McFadyean. Ben is a UK-based German football writer who's worked for 442, World Soccer Magazine, Golf News, Ruhr24, Ruhrnachrichten, and is also the host of the Borussia Dortmund Fan Club London podcast. And he's here to talk a little bit about the possible appointment of Sebastian Kehl as Director of Football at Tottenham. A lot to get into, so let's get on with it.
Let me be the one that you turn to, someone you can rely on, closer each day, home and away.
Ben, how are you?
Hey, Graeme. Great to see you again. Thanks a lot for having me on. And pretty pertinent talking about Sebastian Kehl, Captain Marvel, the old fantastic defender, brilliant Germany international, much loved in Dortmund. But a massive shoe to put on again at Tottenham Hotspur. So let's have a chat about that.
I feel like this is a tough ask for any director of football, because I feel like there are two possible outcomes this season. One is we scrape survival, and the other one is we get relegated. And both of those will be difficult jobs, but one obviously be quite different. The role will be very, very different if we are relegated. But we can come on to that a little bit in a bit. So
yeah,
I was just recounting that obviously the episode we had you on before was just before the Dortmund home game, Tottenham Dortmund at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. And since then we've had two managers. So
amazing.
Two changes of manager even. So not the most stable period at the club. And obviously around that same period at the end of January, we lost Fabrizio Paratici, who was one of our co-directors of football, along with Lange, who he's still with the club at the moment. And I think that when the season started, Lange was supposed to be like a youth scout, so scouting for the youth teams and looking for young talent across the world to kind of bolster the players behind the players coming through, which I think he was doing a reasonable job of. And Paratici was more of the ready-made players for the first team in terms of recruitment, certainly. And with Paratici leaving, I think that our January window was a bit of a disaster in the end. It was, given the amount of injuries that we have sustained across the whole season. I think we've currently got 5 ACL injuries, just ACLs, without all the other stuff. We didn't do enough to bolster the squad, and we're seeing that play out because the last two managers, so Judah and Zerbi now, both have struggled with options for just to get players on the pitch. Brings us nicely to the fact that it looks like for all of the candidates that the club has spoken to, that Kehl is the preferred option. I'm not sure whether a decision or an announcement will be made before the end of the season. I'm wondering if a decision will rest very much on which league we're playing in next season, because that might make a big difference to the finances at the club, and also whether someone will be a good fit for the role, because it's a very different role, I think, trying to get a team promoted out of the Championship compared to rebuilding a Premier League team. But I guess that there's all of that. So I guess the Kehl obviously had been at Dortmund for a very long time, right? For about 13 years as a player, on and off, or from when he started there. Maybe you could tell us a bit more about his history with the club, and then and how he ended up as a director of football there.
Yeah, sure. Great. So great summary, I think, and summarizes nicely the issues. And I think the issues are manifold and have built up over time. And perhaps there are similarities between the two clubs in terms of the issues and how they've come about. On the one side, it's worked well for Dortmund, and on the other side, it seems to have not worked well. That focus on pure profitability, in fact, at Spurs, and at the cost of silverware and so on. So, I think over the years, perhaps people have admired Tottenham, the way they've run their club, and particularly the stadium. But then it seems that the wheels have come off the system, and you do really need to look at changing that. So, in terms of Captain Kehl, 32 times Germany international, an admirable, committed, disciplined leader in the locker room. Players like Nico Schlotterbeck, Kevin Schlotterbeck, many, many, many good players that have come through from Freiburg, Roman Bürki, Oh, the list is very, very long. So it's a club with a fantastic academy and fantastic academy playing at the third tier, the highest level in possible for that level. Freiburg themselves, in spite of having a very small budget of about 100 million, semi-finalists this year again in the DFB Pokal. Previous season, they were in the Pokal final. No, sorry, the season before that, they were in the Pokal finals. Kehl came from that club. He came from, a club that had been managed by one manager, Christian Streich, for 15 years. A very, very, very solid guy and with the right kind of mentality. And he led Dortmund to the double title, Champions League final, one Champions League final as a player and one as a sporting director. And basically, you couldn't fault the guy in terms of his playing ability. You couldn't fault him in terms of his leadership, his mentality, his discipline, his commitment, a guy who barely picked up a yellow card, let alone a red card. So total commitment, fantastic player, outstanding professional, model professional. And also from what I know of him personally, I've only come across him once at the Christmas party. There's an annual Christmas party for fan club presidents. I run the Dortmund fan club in London. And the players, believe it or not, get behind the bar and chat with the players and do autographs and things, because Dortmund is a quite open and friendly club in that way, which I think German football in some ways has that kind of...
I was going to say, I can't imagine that happening in the Premier League.
Yeah. I think that's kind of a reputation that they've earned themselves, and it's a great one. It's one that's really loved. And Kehl himself came across really well. I know that he's done a lot of work and charity work as well with trafficked women. He's been on the board of advisor of Ruhrnachrichten, which is a charity for trafficked women in Germany. Women have been, subjected to sex traffic and things like that. So, I mean, he's also known to be a person of faith, which I think today's world can only really be an advantage. And he's a guy who's very, very sound overall. So you're getting a guy who, much like Klopp, is, a sound and relatable human being. Sounds good so far, right? Let's talk about
sounds
Dortmund.
Perfect. Yeah.
Sounds good.
I guess I think it's very hard as well when someone's been that successful and that well liked as a player to step into an administrative role in a club as well, right? Because I guess they get a bit of a honeymoon no matter what happens, but it must be tough.
Yeah. So it's kind of straightforward, the story. I've written a couple of articles about it. Basically, there's a concept called Stallgeruch in Germany, which is basically, it means the smell of the stable. And what it essentially means is that when it's a hard concept to explain, but basically what Dortmund has a habit of doing is they have a habit of keeping everything in the stable, keeping everything inside, keeping everything to themselves, not letting stuff get out to the media, hiring guys who come through the stable, who've been foals in the club and then been stallions in the club and have seen the whole process through and have contributed to the club on every level and who are trusted and liked and so on, rather than bringing in people from the outside. And that's fine as long as it works. But when it doesn't work, then obviously you've just got someone around who has a fantastic reputation as a player, but basically is not decisive enough or capable enough in the position that he's currently in. Now, Sebastian Kehl, I mean, Dortmund, in typical Dortmund style, they did everything very sound. They brought him in to follow up on, and I won't mince my words here, the legendary Michael Zorc. Michael Zorc, not only former captain who led us to multiple title wins and the Champions League win, transformed the club as a player and later as a sporting director, is responsible for pretty much, I would say, 80% of the best transfers that Dortmund have ever done, and had kept the club and transformed the club after 2005 brush with bankruptcy to the powerhouse that they became under Jurgen Klopp and pretty much since. So when the all-time record player, basically steps down, he's the one guy I've never met at Dortmund, believe it or not. I'd really like to meet Michael Zorc. He's kind of him and Marco Reus. But that's saying I've been around Dortmund for 30 years, so 30 plus years. But basically what happened was that he was given a kind of an apprenticeship, if you like. He was given a couple of years to work to Michael Zorc, and 2 to 3 years where he could basically learn the ropes, see what was going on, see how things were done, and in the meantime take his UEFA badges and so on and try to reach the level where he'd be able to take on responsibility. When Hans-Joachim Watzke, who is now the chairman of the club, I should know this because I've been translating his book into English, his biography. Lars Ricken, who many may remember, scored the 3-1 against Juventus from the halfway line. I don't know, in the 97 final.
Right.
He who won numerous titles as a player with Dortmund was head of the youth academy, which basically took Dortmund to becoming the record under-19s champions of the country alongside VfB Stuttgart, which is a huge achievement for the club. Basically, I think anybody who's listening to this would know that Dortmund have a fantastic reputation for youth development, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So basically, Lars Ricken is promoted to managing director of the club, and Sebastian Kehl is promoted to a kind of head of professional football or sporting director type role. And Hans-Joachim Watzke then moves up to becoming chairman of the club. And basically, in my opinion, and I think a lot of people agree with this, you mentioned it before the beginning of the show, that you were kind of aware that quite a lot of Dortmund fans felt a slight sense of relief when Mr. Kehl basically left the club. The club have ended up paying him a reputed about 2.5 million euros. He left in a typical Dortmund way, which is basically no fuss, no bother, trying to keep tempers down. He wasn't perceived to be somebody who was leaving under a cloud. But then you look at the numbers and you just say, this is Borussia Dortmund. And there is a reason why Tottenham Hotspurs have now got a yellow wall or white wall in the new stadium.
Yeah, it's kind of the blueprint for
standing terrace. The Westfalenstadion, or Signal Iduna Park as it's commercially known, 80,000. I mean, it's literally, it's hair-raising. I mean, it's unbelievable, the atmosphere. I know any Spurs fans like my friend Aaron or Niall Davey, both Spurs fans who've come out to Dortmund, or other Spurs fans that have gone through us, or other Premier League fans that have gone out to Dortmund, everyone comes back saying the same. The yellow wall is absolutely outstanding. And I hope genuinely that it's working at Tottenham. Is it working? Are you having that same effect of a standing terrace behind the goal?
I think we've been lacking the football on the pitch to really make it work, if I'm honest. And I think that we've had a flat couple of years in terms of home fixtures. We think this season we've had more managers than home wins. And I'm not even joking. That's true. We've had 2 home wins in this season so far. There's only 2 more home games left. So I think the home atmosphere has been difficult. Very difficult.
In spite of winning.
I think I've been in that stand in a Champions League game, the quarterfinal against Man City, like the first season that it was open, and it was electric and it was incredible. When the football matches the enthusiasm of the supporters, it is amazing. But I think it will take a while. But the principle's the same. We had some really great tifosi, and I think it's a really good feature for the stadium. But I think we've got a way to go to even get close to Dortmund's yellow wall. Yeah, the tifos and the choreographies and so on. Absolutely, that's right. Well, basically, what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that, in spite of Bayern's dominance, league title number 35, I think it's now the last 10 years, if I'm not mistaken. Bayer Leverkusen slipped one in 2 years ago. Borussia Dortmund have won a German Cup in 2021, and that's what they've won since the Klopp era. And that was the season that Zorc stepped down, wasn't it? After that, was it 2022 that Kehl took over?
I believe that's correct. I believe that's correct. It would be somewhere around that time. Yeah, that's about right. But Klopp left in 2018 for Liverpool, and we've had 8 managers since Klopp. 7 or 8 managers since Klopp's. That's quite unusual as well, isn't it, for Dortmund in terms of the turnover of managers like that? Yeah, it is. It is quite unusual. A couple of them are interim managers, but yes, it is quite unusual. That's absolutely right, and certainly it should have continued with people like Thomas Tuchel. Having won the German Cup, shouldn't have left so early. The bottom line is that a club like Borussia Dortmund, and I think anyone in England can relate to this, anyone who loves BVB or admires BVB, a club that's consistently turning out 55,000 season tickets, constantly 81,000 sold out. come rain or shine, no matter whether they're playing well or not. That type of loyalty has to be rewarded with silverware on one level. And I mean, if you followed the clubs as I've done since the early 90s, then you basically, you don't necessarily expect silverware. But the modern generation of fans that have followed us since the 2000s or whatever, they do expect it. And I think basically you could say that, quite frankly, that the Kehl era just simply hasn't brought enough silverware, and it just hasn't been impressive at all, really, to be fair. There have been some good business deals done, some good transfers, not least Jude Bellingham, although honestly, there are disputes about the nature of the contract that Erling Haaland signed at Borussia Dortmund, but stating that perhaps there was a substantial limit to the amount they could actually charge for him. But he actually, as far as I recall, and I should know this because I did an interview for 442 September 23, an 8-page interview with Erling Haaland. Walked away for somewhere about 60 to 65 million, but he was a 200 million pound player. So as to how, that basically happened, and many other transfers which Dortmund has seen where there's been a series of, rather confusing things that have happened, the failures to sign people like Ryan Cherki and other players where basically we've picked up players which have not worked out, and basically players have walked out like Arenal Selmino, or, I don't even like to mention the names. It just feels like it's not the way Dortmund does business. It's just simply, it just hasn't been the way we would like to see things being done. And it's left people doubting the club. It's left people doubting the management. And a lot of people have basically said, I just get to the point that perhaps who is in demand. He has had, inquiries from Hamburg, who were in the second tier last season. I don't know if that's an ominous thing for you. I don't know what you should think about that. An ambitious club, with a good history. But basically people have had doubts as to whether Kehl was decisive enough, and whether he basically perhaps to some degree fairly should be regarded as the architect of Dortmund's mishaps, let's just say. I have to be very frank with you. I think I don't like, as a Dortmund fan and fan club president, I don't like to speak badly about anyone connected to the club.
I understand that.
But I also, at the same time, as a sports journalist, have to be very fair and say that it hasn't been a successful era really at all. It's, someone's got to take the blame for that. And I think it's much easier to blame Kehl due to his lack of inexperience rather than good intentions. I'm sure he has the right intentions, that's obvious. But than Lars Ricken, who has achieved so much, in the academy, basically. A lot, really impressive. Yeah.
It's a good question that I had, I think, around that, because I think you talked a little bit about the fact that the kind of the stable, keeping it all in the house and promoting from within and all those things, that even into kind of administrative roles in the club, not just the players, obviously. Does that mean effectively the club is set up almost like a factory, and that someone's really just the custodian of that? Or does the director of football, the sporting director, really have that much influence? How much of it is it's set up to produce or to bring in these players and produce squads for the coaches, or is it really something that like there is a figurehead and has all the responsibility, or is it something that's much more a team? So how much of the success or failure is the sporting director compared to the whole team?
Yeah. Well, I think undoubtedly Dortmund is a club that lives from its reputation. I mean, they're the reason they can attract players like Erling Haaland. I remember when Erling was going to sign, I interviewed Andre Bergdolmo, who was a defender who played for Borussia Dortmund from Norway, the 2 caps for Norway. And I asked, will Erling sign for Dortmund? And he said to me, look, when Erling's dad asked me, I think his dad was, what was his dad's name again?
Alfie Inge Haaland.
Alfie Inge Haaland, that's right, yeah. But then he asked me basically, which club should I go to? Andre Bergdolmo said to me directly, straight up, Borussia Dortmund, no other club, basically. For this guy's future development, that's the club that he should be joining. And then the same with Job Bellingham, following in the footsteps of Jude Bellingham, and also Jadon Sancho when he came from England, from the Manchester City Academy, and other players, basically. It's just,
Didn't you have wasn't Iheanacho as well from Man City as well? I seem to recall.
That's not a player that's played for Borussia Dortmund.
Oh, really?
Unless you're pronouncing it.
That's quite possible as well. Yeah.
Unless you're pronouncing it. Can you say it again?
Iheanacho.
We've had Maatsen.
It was another youth player at City that Tottenham are interested in, and I think he went to Germany. I thought it was to Dortmund, but I might be wrong.
No, I have to think about that one. That doesn't ring a bell. But we've had Maatsen, we've had Sancho, we've had a series of players that have come from Man City, and basically, it's a club that does live on its past in terms of the fact that they've had such a fantastic reputation of developing youth players. But on the same note, whilst the academy is incredibly impressive, has an incredible reputation, does attract young players who want to follow in the footsteps of these great players and develop and have that opportunity. At the same time, there are some, because it's a relatively smaller setup compared to Bayern Munich or some of the top Premier League clubs, there are some very, very key positions within the club, and those do have a lot of responsibility. And so I would argue that the influence of Michael Zorc at the club was phenomenal across the club. And I feel that the position that Kehl stepped into, albeit then with Lars Ricken, who did have a lot of experience, was a very big position for him to be stepping into. And I just simply observed that Kehl made mistakes in terms of his negotiations, not just at retaining players, but also at securing players for the club. And his reputation as a negotiator were undermined by counterparties. Now, again, a lot of this is hearsay, but a lot of this, in my case, is also based on my own experience around the club, talking to people within the club, talking to players, interviewing players. I've interviewed more than 30 former players and coaches and so on, and just stories that you hear. So to some degree, a lot of the stories are qualified, but it's also really just, obviously, as a journalist, you're just analysing the information on a daily basis and so on. And you just see basically what happens season after season. So it kind of just builds up layer after layer after layer. So while some of it is hearsay, some of it is definitely proven in terms of the outcome of the negotiations, where a player like Ryan Cherki was supposed to join and then ultimately then walked away. And, John Textor saying at the time that he was then heading up Olympique Lyon, one of his stable of clubs, saying that Dortmund's offer was embarrassing and below market rate. So basically, whilst it's understandable that Dortmund have a limit of about 30 million, that they're not generally willing to go higher than that. At the same time, Ryan Cherki was the number one signing that the club wanted to make, a very, very crucial signing at the time.
Yeah.
You can argue that anyone in that position at Borussia Dortmund has a limit in terms of what they're able to spend, what they're able to do. But you also can argue that perhaps he has shown himself to be inexperienced as a negotiator and has lacked vision, which in the club has very clearly affected our effectiveness and ability to win silverware. And the fans have been pretty bitter and pretty disappointed. And then, of course, you add to that the fact that numerous managers have come and gone, and there hasn't seemed to be a way found to work with some very big names in order to get the club really, kicking, basically. We did miss out on the title, 3 years ago? Was it 2 or 3 years ago?
Oh, it went down to the last game, didn't it?
Mainz 0-5. Had we won that title, I think there would have been a very different feeling about how things turned out. But the fact is that we haven't won silverware for a long time. And even a Champions League final in 2024, which thankfully was here in London, has not been enough to appease people, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like there's a lot of similarities in the current state of Tottenham. In fact, I think it's worse. And I think that's where we can probably come on to next, like the kind of Tottenham aspect of this and why it either would or wouldn't be a good fit for him at the moment. Because I feel like all of the things that you've maybe mentioned that aren't his strengths would really play badly at the moment with the current setup at Tottenham. Because if he's been in a club with a lot of experience around him, we have got the opposite of that at the moment. We have effectively a new board with new chairman. I think the CEO is unlikely to survive the summer because of what a mess this season has been. I think I would actually be surprised if Lange's still there next season, even though they're saying that he will work alongside Kehl or whoever we bring in. Plus, on top of that, obviously a new coach, new coaching staff. I also expect Zerbi to flesh out his backroom team more in the summer. I think that, no, they didn't want to make... I think typically he travels with 6 or 7 people, and I think he brought 2 with him. But I think that was more because there wasn't enough games to really completely change everything. So this was really about finding an extra 10% out of the existing players without making wholesale changes. There just wasn't time to affect that. So I feel like there's so much in flux at the moment at the club that to bring in someone, well, what we really need is a steady hand more than anything. And so that it feels like a bit of a poison chalice for anybody, let alone someone without a track record of producing trophy-winning teams.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with you. I feel that perhaps, in spite of my giving, I mean, obviously any Dortmund fan would want Sebastian Kehl to do really well. And as a Bundesliga writer myself, I follow all the coaches and all the German players in England. And I sometimes get the chance to meet some of them and interview them and so on. And I follow the German stories, basically. And obviously, I'd like to see Sebastian Kehl do well. I mean, I think, he's got all the right attributes and he's got the qualifications. But the problem is that whilst Borussia Dortmund is a fantastic name and it's one where, we've had some great games in the past between Dortmund and I've been to many of them in Spurs. And I think a lot of people would love to see the two clubs. You've had Stefan Freund in the past and so on. You've had Jürgen Klinsmann, not a Dortmund player, but you've had a good experience with German players in the past. I mean, I think a lot of people would love to see it work out. But I think the big issue is that basically he certainly doesn't have any experience of the second tier. And I think personally, if it were me, I would be looking for someone with more experience and also experience of winning. Now, I mentioned the Borussia Dortmund situation. I mean, basically, you had Lucien Favre, Edin Terzic, Marco Rose, Terzic again, Niko Kovac again. I mean, the instability on the coaching is very similar to Tottenham Hotspurs. And I mean, where's that coming from, basically? I mean, I talked to Dave Kitson. I guess you'll remember him.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Player, he's now at Maidstone. And he basically said to me that in his opinion, if you look at Manchester United and Tottenham Hotspurs, they've had some stunning managers, basically from Pochettino, Thomas Frank, Mourinho, Jose Mourinho in particular.
Conte, yeah.
But also Espirito Santo, who did a fantastic job at Wolves.
Yeah. It looks like and the way things are going, he may well save West Ham as well, which will be at our expense.
Yeah,
so
possibly.
It would be incredible for him.
But I think Dave Kitson is absolutely spot on. I mean, Dave obviously proved himself as a stunning player. And, he was very clear that he said that there's a rotten football culture in clubs like Manchester United and Tottenham Hotspurs. As it stands at this current time, the culture is just not there, and anyone coming is going to struggle. And, and I think that the way Ralf Rangnick, another German top guy, was treated at Manchester United.
It's awful, yeah.
Same thing. So ultimately, football has sold its soul to some degree. And until that is resolved, which to some degree is the key issue, I think. And, I think all the attributes are there. But remember that Tottenham Hotspurs is to some degree is also in a very, very difficult situation because, they've got this massive carbuncle of a stadium that's cost £1 billion that they're still paying off and is costing a huge amount of interest and money. And basically, if they go down, even the parachute payment is a very small amount of money compared to what they're used to currently. So, how many of those players are going to want to stay? You need someone solid. You need someone really experienced.
This is my concern. You said that there were some concerns over his negotiation skills. And this summer, even if we stay up, a number of the senior players are going to want to move on. So someone's going to either have to persuade them to stay or at least get us a good deal selling them on and then replace them. So there could be a massive churn in the squad, which will require a lot of negotiating in and out. And if we go down, it will be even worse because as I understand it, a significant number of the contracts that the players are on have a salary cut on relegation, which will mean they will be even more motivated to leave the club. And we will probably be motivated to sell enough to try and bridge the gap between the revenue between Premier League and Champions League this season and Championship. That it feels like that all of the things we need are probably not his strengths. And so it feels like a really poor fit at the moment. Not that I don't think that maybe if things we were in a bit more stable position, and it was just a kind of changing of the guard between one to the next. Like if Paratici decided to leave at the end of a season and everything was stable and we had no issues and we were mid-table even, then I think it maybe is a very different discussion. But I feel like it's going to be a really unpleasant summer for somebody in that role. And that's a lot to step into without maybe the confidence to do those deals.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Just checked it out before the show. I mean, Muani, Palinia, Davies, their contracts are up. Richarlison, Van der Veen, Romero, both saying they want to leave.
Yeah.
A 50% reduction in wages, which is never going to be popular. And then basically, your income, in spite of the 100 million parachute, your media income will evaporate, and most of the sponsors apparently are starting to ask for concessions in the event of going down. One thing that does speak for this, though, I have to say, is that Sebastian Kehl had a very good relationship with Mike Tulberg, former Hearts striker who was Dortmund's under-19 coach and under-23 coach, and at one point coached the first team for 2 or 3 matches last season. And when Nuri Sahin left. And I think maybe the Johan Lange, Sebastian Kehl thing may be one of the reasons why they are talking together and, where they might be looking, because generally Germans and Danes have worked very well together. So I think that is a possible strength. And I also think that so that is one possibility where I think it might potentially work if Johan Lange and Sebastian Kehl can really build a really good working relationship together, and then perhaps do a little bit like Norwich City did in 2018-19 under Daniel Farke, where they had 11 German or former Bundesliga players, German-speaking players in the side. The team was known as Die Kanarienvögel, the Canaries in German.
I like it.
He brought in a lot of players that have been outstanding in the second and third tiers. So I think in some ways, if they did kind of look at something like that of rebuilding the club basically with perhaps lesser players, maybe the club actually need to rebuild that culture.
I think there's certainly an aspect to that I would be comfortable with. But my worry is the Championship is a really tough league.
Absolutely.
It's very tough. It's a 46 game slog. And I think it's almost more competitive than the Premier League. And without there'll be teams there that like Wolves will go down, Burnley will go down, but there's also teams down like Leicester just got relegated for a second time. Blackburn are in the relegation zone. So these are teams who have won the league and now they're dropping down 2 flights to the third tier. Right. And I worry that the burden of carrying a Premier League cost base for the players, even on half salaries, we're going to have people on 80 to 100 million, 100 a week, which is an insane amount of money. And I think that's one of the reasons that some of the clubs that have gone down have had those issues, because they just the players that got them relegated, nobody wanted them, and then they couldn't move a lot of them on, so they're stuck with these players on huge salaries. And I worry that something like that could happen to us as well.
Yeah, I agree with you, Graeme.
I think there's a lot of good young talent in the squad that we could build a team around, but I think what we will need is to bolster that with some experience as well.
I agree with you, Graeme. I think I'd like to emphasize that Kehl did do some good deals as well. And I would emphasize there, if I could just name a couple, Felix Nemetša turned out to be a very good deal. Julian Rierson turned out to be a very good deal. The Norwegian defender who came in for just 5 million, who's been speculated in the Premier League. Also Karim Adeyemi, who's been on the radar of a number of top Italian, Spanish, English clubs and so on, and Nico Schlotterbeck, they just managed to renew his contract again, centre back at Borussia Dortmund for the German national team. Absolutely stunning buy, also Daniel Svensson again, who came in for next to nothing, I think 3 or 5 million from Denmark. So he has done some very good deals, but he's also done some, in my opinion, incredibly poor deals as well.
Yeah.
Letting Pascal Gross go, letting Aaron Anselmino go under very strange circumstances, even paying 35 million, a record club signing of Joe Bellingham. It's not a proven signing yet, to be fair. People are not sure even whether Fabio Silva was actually a good buy at 29 million. It's been highly criticised. He's starting to look good, but let's face it, any Rangers or Wolves fans would agree that he basically isn't he's not quite what people were expecting. I just, what can you say? Basically, too many poor decisions and too many doubts about his negotiating ability. If you're looking for someone to restructure, to rebuild again in the second tier, I think basically you're going to need to cut away a lot of fat, and
Oh, yeah.
start again in the mold of something like Norwich City or one of the smaller clubs, or perhaps Burnley when they went up under Vincent Kompany. And I know how much that must hurt people who are Tottenham Hotspurs fans to think of themselves like a Norwich City or a Southampton or a Burnley. But, ultimately, that Europa League win in 2025, which is not very long ago, is going to feel
No,
a very, 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 very long time ago in a couple
it
of
was.
weeks' time if you don't win the next 4 games.
I think, it's nearly a year, isn't it? It's only been 2 or 3 weeks. I think it would have been a year. But I think even that last season, that win papered over a lot of cracks that were there all of last
Oh,
season.
yeah.
And I think this
Yeah.
is taking the coaches out. This squad is it's not good. It's not well balanced. It's lopsided. We have strengths in one area, not others. We've got too many number 8s in the squad. There's a whole bunch of stuff that maybe should have been addressed, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I mean, ultimately, Big Ange, did a stunning job at Celtic, and I think he was doing a really good job at Spurs. But as you say, 19th place finish, and the amount of goals conceded, 65 goals conceded last season. Then you've gone on to continue conceding goals in spite of having some really, really extraordinary. I mean, your squad value is not dissimilar to Bayern Munich. I mean, it's pretty much up there, and the names that you've signed. I
Yeah.
mean, Dortmund would have absolutely love to have signed some of these players. I mean, this is the thing, is I think ultimately, this is why I think Dave Kitson's got it absolutely right. It's the culture seems to be really, really bad at the club, and like West Ham United. And I wonder personally how many of those decisions have been made by agents who are earning a large amount of money from the transfer deals and working perhaps to some degree not in the interest of the club. I mean, who really knows why Levy ended up leaving? I'm not an expert on Spurs, and I'm not even going to try to speculate. I really
Well,
don't want to. But it isn't a
yeah,
good culture. I can
I
see
agree.
that.
I think the problem is that the organisation has been run by business people,
Yeah.
and we kind of needed that to get us through a period with the build of the stadium and the transformation of the off the field activities, like the new training ground and all the additional revenue streams that the club are trying to build to make us more financially stable. I understand all of the reasoning behind that, but we basically traded that for footballing identity and somebody who could set the rules and what the club needed to be on the pitch. I think that Levy was never that. Vinay, the guy who's come in as CEO, I don't think he's that either. I think if you speak to a lot of Arsenal fans, they are almost quite happy to see him go as well. We seem to have taken a lot of people who didn't have a particularly successful period at the clubs they were at. Yeah, we're going to have to make some really solid decisions this summer. We can't afford to keep constantly changing like we have been. So, difficult.
This reminds me a little bit about historically Dortmund in '66. They won the European Cup Winners' Cup, and then by 1971 they were relegated to the second tier. It was a similar 3-year rebuild in the second tier, and I did actually manage to interview players from the 1971-72 season when they got relegated, and there was a similar kind of crisis of culture and identity, but also a sense of relying on past glories. And I think that this often does happen when a club, for example, Union Berlin, when they reached the Champions League, they went up from the second tier. Then in their second season, they're playing the Champions League. Then suddenly they're, on the edge of relegation. And then this season again, it's just simply, flying high and crashing fast, and
Yeah.
I'm amazed how quickly Tottenham Hotspurs have failed. And I think probably, anybody who comes in, whether it's Roberto De Zerbi, who quite frankly doesn't have much of a record of winning trophies. Let's be very frank.
No,
You
it's
know,
true.
he
I think
literally does not. So apart from doing a good job at Brighton in terms of taking them to Europe, again, I mean, what kind of situation is the club really in right now? He won 2 trophies in the Romanian second tier and a Super Cup with Shakhtar Donetsk. Is that really a big achievement? I don't know, basically.
Coming
You tell
second in
me.
France behind PSG as well, I guess, is as close as you're going to get with in terms of
Olympique Marseille, yeah.
yeah. I know it's interesting. I think I'm finding it really difficult. I'm a bit numb to the current situation. I think obviously with 4 remaining matches, we can't afford to. We need to do better than West Ham every week. I said we were talking about it in the last pod recording we did last week, in that we could win our last 5 matches. We could get 15 points. We could finish on 46 points and still get relegated, because if West Ham win their last 5 games, same situation. We're down, because they're 2 points ahead of us at the moment. So it could literally be the highest points tally that someone got relegated on this season still. So we need to find a way to keep winning and hope that West Ham drop points. And then the summer, whichever way we look at it, we go down, the summer's a complete rebuild. We don't go down, I think it's not going to be that different. I think the only difference will be the amount of money available to make the changes, and the likelihood that we would lose probably less players from the current squad. But I don't know if that's a good thing or not, because maybe we need that change.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it would be fair to say, wouldn't it, that there's been a lot of injuries?
But this is the other thing, is that players that might want to move away in the summer won't be able to, because they'll still be in hospital. We've got, like Kulusevski hasn't come back from last season when he got injured. Maddison still hasn't played a single minute. Kudus is out long term. Odebert's out long term. Now we've got Xavi out long term. Xavi, I think, probably would have moved on in the summer if we got relegated. But now a lot of these players won't be able to go, and we'll be stuck with their salaries, and they won't be able to play for us. We'll have to have enough players in the squad to cope without them, and they'll come back, and we'll have to support their salaries as well. So it's a tough one.
Yeah.
It's going to be a real balancing act for somebody. Yeah. And if it is Sebastian Kehl, he's going to have his hands full. Let's put it that way.
He's going to have his hands full. Actually, perhaps, we could also emphasize the fact that he had a 67% win rate with Shakhtar Donetsk, which, albeit, to be fair, a massive club in quite a small league. But Pascal Gross, obviously, who's at Brighton Hove Albion, who was Borussia Dortmund, spoke about, and this is a positive thing, he spoke about Zerbi as being one of the most professional and influential managers. And also Pep Guardiola also spoke about him being a highly influential and highly competent coach. And so, I think that in spite of not winning very much silverware, and also the fact that his own personal playing career wasn't, let's say, covered in glory. He's had more clubs and, well, just about as many as Mario Balotelli. At the same time, he is a coach who's basically shown himself to be a person of ability. He also has an attacking-minded, possession-based football, which is the type of football that Sebastian Kehl would basically take to, and would also be used to from Borussia Dortmund. And I think there are similarities, and I think that you could do a lot worse than a solid German manager at that level. But I have to be frank and say perhaps not particular manager. I did identify a candidate potentially who I thought Dortmund let go of Shad Forsyth, the American athletics coach, earlier in the season. He'd been with the Germany national team and had also done phenomenal work in the United States, an American. He's recently signed up at AFC Sunderland, but that could be someone who Sebastian Kehl has a very good relationship with, who could potentially be a candidate if he could be persuaded to move, in terms of dealing with the high level of injuries and so on. So, in terms of his ability to find the typical Dortmund thing of identifying low-cost, highly talented players and developing them, working with Johan Lange together in that respect, who also has a good reputation, has worked with top clubs himself, and then basically bringing in someone like Shad Forsyth and a few others. Remember what Jurgen Klopp did when he went to Liverpool, and he basically brought in German and Dutch, almost all the staff, from the physios, the fitness coaches, everyone, even the chef, the head chef, they were all either German, Dutch. And so you could see a mini revolution happening in the instance that the club goes down. It's very hard to predict what will happen, but basically, it could be an interesting innovation. It could be something that could really work. It's working for Danny Roll at Rangers right now, German coach. It's working for Tonda Eckert at Southampton, another German coach again, who both of them have brought in a number of German players and so on. So, I'm not overemphasizing the fact that the Bundesliga is a a very good hunting ground for players who can end up producing. I think Nick Woltemade is the exception to this, where basically Newcastle have massively overpaid. So there are very, very good players to be had from there. And, it is, I would say quite honestly, and again, it hurts me a bit to say this, but the Bundesliga is the championship of Europe. It's the second tier at the very, very top of European football beneath the Premier League. So, yeah, there is a lot of potential there.
Yeah, I think the fact that Dortmund and Bayern are always so prominent and typically make it to later stages in European competitions has done a lot for the Bundesliga. But I think that it's interesting. Like we talked, a little bit about Kehl's tenure at the club, and I think now it is a much more difficult market for directors of football to find players, because even in England, Tottenham are not competing for the best players. We're competing for the ones after the other. Once Real Madrid, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, Man City, Arsenal, Chelsea and Man United have had their pick of the players, we're going for the next tier as well. So it's not like, even with the revenues that we have, I think this year we were the fifth highest revenue of football club in the world, and we're still not competing at that level with those players with that kind of salaries as well. So I think, it's a tough market. It is a tough market.
Or maybe that belt tightening and the refocusing on core values is perhaps exactly the right approach. And then maybe a manager from a top German club, and I could name other ones who could potentially be of interest, might be the right thing to do for the club. But the fact of the matter is, it almost feels like, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this, it's just an opinion, it feels as if perhaps to some degree, under Levy at least, that emphasis on profitability, extremely unusual emphasis on profitability and fiscal responsibility and tight, careful financial management, which a lot of Spurs fans basically got extremely annoyed about. Their unwillingness to splash the cash, basically. Somehow that was a much more of a Bundesliga type model where most of the clubs are in profit than it is a Premier League model.
Yeah. And that's fair and probably true. The difference is, even compared to other Premier League teams like Brighton and Bournemouth and Brentford, who I think have a much more Dortmund-like model in terms of how they've always got procession of players coming through. There's always they generate a lot of revenue from the sale of players, but they've always got purpose-made replacements lined up. The squad is built with its own succession plan built into it, and even the coaching, they switch coaches because they do a good job, they get a bigger job. They've always been able to bring in coaches that have done a really good job. So the whole package works really well, and that's something that we haven't got. So even if we have that model where we're buying prospects and buying the next, trying to find the next, uncover the next nuggets, that doesn't always work. That only works if you've got the best recruitment and the best team around all of that. They're using a lot of data, and we say we do data-driven recruitment, but I don't know what data they're looking at sometimes, because it doesn't always bear fruit. And I feel that I would expect the hit rate to be a lot higher than it has been. But yeah,
absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
I hope there's change coming, because I don't think my heart could take many more seasons like this one.
Yeah,
it's been a tough.
I can understand that absolutely. I think, from an observer who is basically steeped in Bundesliga is what I write about every day. The German football scene finds the transfer fees astonishing that are paid in the Bundesliga, in the Premier League, and the perception is that money is wasted hand over fist season after season, and that the fans basically are paying the price in terms of the season tickets. And I think most Spurs fans would agree that the prices are too high.
Yeah, and I don't think they'll go down even if we get relegated, because they'll just say there's extra games. There's 23 games instead of 19. So
my question for you, Graeme, is is there enough of a football culture at Tottenham Hotspurs to be able to revitalise the club and focus on core values and knuckle down and basically rebuild in a solid and stable way with less of the big superstars and more kind of journeyman, standard, reliable players? Have you got the culture to be able to do that? Is there enough in the back room in terms of genuine football people who really believe in the club, who will be able to lead the club when some of these big decision makers basically are being forced to move on. And inevitably, a lot of the superstars have been moved on as well. And you've got to do it.
Yeah.
You really have to do it, whether you stay up or not. I mean, whatever you're doing right now is not working. That's clear.
My honest answer is no. I don't think we have. There's not enough football people involved in the running of the club. I think we've lost our identity as a football club, and it's been lost to the financial and business aspects of the business and the people that are in charge. That is has been their priority. They talk a good job about the football, but we've never really seen it on the pitch. And again, I expect there to be wholesale change pretty much at all levels of the club in the summer, irrespective of whether we get relegated or not. The question then is, does that put us in a better position to make a comeback, either from the Championship or to rebuild in the Premier League? And I guess only time will tell.
Only time will tell. And at the end of the day, whoever comes into that job needs to have a very experienced, has a lot of experience and a substantial background of success. But even that's not going to guarantee anything, because quite frankly, it doesn't get any better in terms of people like Jose Mourinho, who've been at the club, managed to fail, sacked within days of the final and so on.
Yeah.
And Conte as well. And just some fantastic, people have basically gone through the club. So again, I come back to what Dave Kitson said, which is that there is a rotten culture of football, and that nothing's going to change that. And often, we saw this with Schalke 04, who were just about to get promoted again to the first Bundesliga. They've had to completely transform the club. They went down with totally uncharacteristic for Germany, I think 150 million worth of debt, which sounds like peanuts for the Premier League, but for Germany, that's really, really bad. And they've had to completely restructure. They brought in Myron Muslich from Plymouth Argyle, of all clubs. And they've basically had to hire talents and second-tier players and rebuild the spirit in the club and get the fans behind them and really rebuild as a unit and come back together again as a football club. And I've seen this time and time again. Hamburger SV, they were down in the second tier for I think it was at least 10 years, which was chronic for a club that had won the Champions League European Cup in 1982. 5-6 German titles, if people called national cups and so on. And, what had been a massive club. And then when they went down, it took them years to come back up again. And I'm not saying it will be similar to Tottenham, because I think the financial system, situation for Tottenham is a lot more strong than it was for Schalke or Hamburg. But they are very similar clubs in terms of, their history and also, just simply the amount of following and so on. And I think that, it will take revising and changing a lot of things. And above all, not perhaps, relying on a star-studded changing room, but actually finding players who have again, I'm going to give one more example. Aston Villa, when they went down, once they came back up again, the kit was made by, I can't remember who the brand was, but it was made by a local company, Birmingham-based. The captain, please tell me the name, I forget his name now, but he was
John McGinn,
who's now at Manchester City, was a guy who brought up at Villa.
Grealish.
Jack Grealish. The coach was a local guy, Everything was steeped in claret and blue when they basically managed to come back up again. And that's what I mean. When you go down Hamburg, Schalke, Villa, you need to really, really, really dig deep and find the identity of the club again and find players that really, the heart beats for Spurs. So it's going to be a big change, whatever happens. It's going to be a very, very big change. And, you know what? Perhaps you actually need someone who knows a little bit more about Tottenham Hotspurs than bringing in somebody from Borussia Dortmund. I don't know what the answer is, but if that's the candidate who's on the table, he's got a great reputation for professionality. He's worked well with Danish managers and players in the past, and maybe him and Johan Lange are the guys to turn it round. But whatever's going to happen, it's not going to be a changing room full of superstars and, winning the Europa League and so on. It's going to be a very different situation. And I mean, that's what's going to happen, isn't it? I mean, ultimately, and if you stay up, is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? You tell me. I don't know.
I don't think I don't have a good feeling either way, to be honest. I'm very cautious about the summer because I know how important it's going to be either way.
Yeah.
So I think there's that. Listen, Ben,
I think so too.
I think we'll call it a night there. But thanks ever so much. It's been really great to talk to you. Really insightful as well. So I appreciate it again. Thanks for coming back on. And hopefully, I guess we'll know more in the coming weeks as to whether Kehl ends up at Tottenham.
Absolutely right.
And also then and what kind of a job he does with it.
All I can say is, may the football gods basically make the right decisions for you as a club to be able to have a bigger and better future. And,
I certainly
it
hope
can't
so.
get much worse. It can't get much worse. Good luck.
Amen to that. Thank you.
Good luck.
Okay, thanks to everyone who's listened in. Please like and subscribe to the podcast to tickle the algorithm so we can get in front of more Tottenham supporters. And to close us out, come on you Spurs.
Let me be the one that you turn to, someone you can rely on, closer each day, home and away.